o'clock. So thank you for those who've joined us so far. I'll be sharing some information in the chat with things I shared during our opening session where we're networking. Again, thank you so much for joining us today for our third session. We hope that you get a lot of information, but without further ado, I want to stop talking because you didn't come here for me and my announcements. You came to hear about the program. So I want to take a moment to introduce PIDC's VP and Senior Loan Officer, Sarah Stroney, who will be sharing information with you today about our third session. Sarah, take it away.
Hey, everybody. All right, let me share my screen, get all set up.
Also, Sarah, while you are pulling everything up, I do want to call out that we have the Senator's office here. And if they wanted to say a few words before we get started, is one of our amazing partners for this series. And so please do share a few words before we start.
Great. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much to PIDC and the staff for putting this together. I believe that folks who have been participating have been getting a lot of great information. I've been hearing from the constituents who've been participating that this is fabulous information that they need in order to be successful in their RACP applications. So I just want to again say thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Great. And please let me know, Jasmine, I think if I could ask some assistance in the monitoring the chat. I know sometimes it can be a little bit difficult for me on a small screen to do the presentation and have the chat up. So please feel free to interrupt if there's a pertinent question as I go through.
You got it.
Thanks. All right. Hey, everybody. So today we're going to talk about two parts to this presentation. One is going to be about how you can bridge your RACP grant because it's a reimbursement program. And then the second part of the presentation is going to be what other things can you use for funding for your RACP project. As you guys found out, for all of you who attended the previous sessions, RACP can only finance less than 50% of a project. So that means you have to have financing sources for the rest. So I do want to talk with you today about some different sources of funds we've seen people use and be successful with and walk you through that. So again, feel free to ask questions as I go through. But we are going to start with, again, the first part will be bridging. So RACP is a reimbursement program, which means that you need to spend the money before you can get reimbursed with that. So that means you have to have a way to spend the money, especially with grant sizes very large. This is, a real something that people really need to consider. If you get $1 million RACP grant and you need to spend at least $1 million to get your grant back, how will you pay your contractor, while they're doing the work, and then later get reimbursed by the state? So there's really two main ways that you can bridge your RACP. Is obviously if you have equity or cash in the bank. So that is something that not very many of our clients have, but for sure some of them might have. And for that, you would actually have to prove that to the state via bank statements that you do have a source to bridge that and can pay those costs and wait to get reimbursed later. But the majority of folks we work with need a bridge loan. And so that's something that we'll talk through in this first part of the presentation. So typically a bank that you might work with or a CDFI like PIDC. So CDFI stands for Community Development Finance Institution. There are several in the city that service the city of Philadelphia and or are in the city of Philadelphia. I will share at the end of the presentation contacts from two other CDFIs, including PIDC and two others that we know work on RACP bridge loans in the city and would be able to help you with this need as well. So I'll share those at the end. A couple things to think about if you need a loan of any kind, but including a bridge loan, is how will I repay this loan's interest and principal? So in terms of the principal on a loan, that's the amount that you take out, that would be repaid by the actual grant proceeds when they come back from the state. But at the moment, what we're seeing, and I think Peter has gone through this in the previous sessions, the average time to receive those grant proceeds from the state is about 2 years from when you submit your business plan. So that would be after you receive your award. You have usually 6 months to submit your business plan. The clock starts ticking then, and that's our current estimate is what we're telling people to plan on. So you have to think, okay, so that's 2 years until I can pay the principal back on this loan. And during that time, you will have to pay interest on that loan. And again, we're talking of potentially very large loan sizes here. So it's really something you want to plan for early, because it does just increase your total budget that you need to think about and fundraise for. The other thing that you want to think about with any loan is, what collateral can I offer? So collateral is, again, it's a little bit of a jargony term for bankers. You might know this best by probably the biggest example of collateral is a mortgage. So if you take out a loan on your home, the bank gives you a loan, but in exchange, they take a mortgage lien on your property, and that is considered collateral. So that would be if something happened and you weren't able to pay back your loan, right? The bank forecloses on your house, or they at least have that as collateral. So all loans need some type of collateral, and CDFIs are more likely to get creative on what types of collateral they take, but all loans need collateral. So previously with the RACP program, one of the things that was collateral was a pledge of the actual grant agreement that you received from the state. So you have a signed grant agreement from the state. That was part of the process that Peter walked through with you in previous sessions. You get that signed grant agreement, and then a bank could take, or a PIDC lender or somebody else could just take a pledge of that. So if the money is paid back through the state, it actually goes to your lender first. The issue is that the state has not been producing those grant agreements early in the process. So a lot of our clients are actually completing construction before they ever get a grant agreement. The issue with that is that there's no collateral then for your loan. So this is a concern that we've had and that we're working through, but is a real issue that somebody needs to, you need to think through about getting a RACP grant. So again, if you don't have your grant agreement, you might have to think about other types of collateral, which is, do you have a mortgage to offer? Do you have maybe a pledge of an investment account or a cash account? That's something else that could be looked at. So this is, it is a little jargony about what bankers are looking at, but it's something that you need to be thinking about right away. Again, so that you're putting together a real project scope and thinking about all the sources that you need, and you're telling the people you're working with and your funders, this is, the cost is larger than you think it is. So that is something to consider. I have a question about what the grant agreement is. Okay, so that is not, I don't know if Peter, you want to step in and talk a little bit about the grant agreement. I know you covered that in other sessions, but I realize that maybe some folks are coming to this session for the first time. And I can do my best to explain the grant agreement. Kind of putting Peter on the spot. Okay, so the grant agreement is the actual signed agreement that you get with the state that says you have the grant, and that the state agrees to give you the grant according to certain conditions that they tell you. So it's a real legal document. If you just have a letter from the state, that's not a legal document. So yeah, Peter, I was just we had a question that came in about what is a grant agreement. So I don't know if you want to give more detail.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. So the grant agreement is the actual legal contract between Harrisburg, the Office of the Budget, and PAID, the entity that acts as the grantee for your grant. PAID then enters into a sub-grant agreement with your organization, and that's how the flow of funds work. So the grant agreement is typically a 50-page legal document. It includes all the requirements of the RACP program, as well as the special conditions to your grant agreement, which you need to meet before you become eligible for reimbursement. Yeah, Sarah, we've sort of talked about everything up until the grant agreement to this point. So a lot of e-application and kind of getting organized, but not the grant agreement phase quite yet.
Got it. Okay, good. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for stepping in.
And Sarah, we do have a raised hand question here from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I am going to allow you to talk. You can unmute your mic and ask your question live.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, during the 2 years that it typically takes to get the reimbursement, is there anything we can do to speed that process up? And is it a time where it's sort of the bureaucracy processing the paperwork and there's sort of silence during that time? So just trying to get a sense of kind of what happens over those 2 years and if there's any way to, improve that process or speed that process.
That is a great question, and I will jump in. So that is during that 2-year period, it's very active. The state will assign a third-party compliance consultant to your project. And at that point, you will be in constant contact with that person to meet the compliance requirements of your grant agreement, as well as the special conditions. So it's the 2-year sound. Yeah, it's not a dead zone of 2 years. It's a very much an active, involved process.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple scenarios about this. So we'll really jump into the details so that to further illustrate how this would work. So say scenario 1, you get $1 million RACP grant and you need to bridge it. Say you have a property, you're in a building that you own and it's worth 1.5 million and you have no mortgage on it. Well, this is a situation where you could maybe go to your bank that you work with. You could obviously reach out to PIDC if you need assistance with bank contacts, but this would be something where a bank could provide a loan. They would basically give you a commercial mortgage, and it would be a very decent loan for a bank. It would actually be in the jargon, it would be a 67% loan to value, meaning the loan is $1 million divided by the value 1.5 is a 67%. That's a very good loan to value for a fairly good loan to value for a bank. So we really think that that's something where you could get a big partner for that. If another scenario, you have $1 million RACP grant, your property, you still have that property, but you already have a mortgage on it. There's already a bank on that.
Yes.
Then, Lawrence, did you have a question or comment? Okay. That is a situation where you might want to come to PIDC or the other contacts that I'll give you at the end of this presentation, where we could potentially take a subordinate lien on the property and provide some more flexible terms than maybe a bank would. So a bank's not going to do a subordinate lien most likely on a property, but that is something that CDFIs get comfortable with. So that's something that we could do. The scenario 3 is way more challenging, and we see it. So I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's definitely challenging. So scenario 3 is you got $1 million RACP grant, but you do not have any collateral to offer. You don't own property. You don't have investment accounts. You don't really have cash. This is more difficult. I think it's still worth the call to us, and we have been able to get creative to see what else we can do. But in this case, we would really want to make sure you have a very experienced team with you. And I know there's been other, there's been other sessions about the team, and then next week is about, construction compliance and knowing how to get the right team to get through the construction compliance. So we would really want to make sure that you were really comfortable with the compliance of the RACP, because there would really be no other way to pay back this big loan if you didn't comply with the grant rules. So that is like something that a lender would have to look at. Accept this part real fast. Okay, we have a question and it says, can the property that you need the grant to remodel be the collateral for the bridge loan? Absolutely. Yeah, that would be a normal scenario and that would be fine. We would just get an appraisal to look at the value and a lot of times you're getting an appraisal anyways for the RACP process. Great question. All right. And even more in the weeds is I'm just going to give you an example, again, as you guys are thinking about your budgets and thinking about the real cost of, your project and how much the RACP grant can bring to your project, but also how much it could cost in these other things like financing. So let's talk about PIDC's current terms for our bridge loan product. So right now, we do not bridge 100% of your grant. We're bridging 96.5% of the grants. So there would need to be another source of funds for the other very small, 3.5. The reason for that is there's two reasons. One is there's a 1% administrative fee, and then that comes to paid as the grantee, and that is will not come back to you. So you submit for your RACP grant proceeds, and you won't get that 1% back, right? It'll be taken out before it ever comes to you. The other 2.5% is the typical retainage that the state holds back on a project and typically keeps for another year, and so that is not money that's like available to repay the principal on the loan. So we just take it out of the loan so there's not a problem at the end. And that means that like a year later, you'll get that little bit of RACP, grant proceeds just back to you. But that's how we've been structuring them lately. We're not the only lender out there, so the other lenders might have a different structure, but that's what this is the structure we've recently taken on, and it's been working well for us. We would offer you interest-only loan for 2 to 3 years, depending on the needs and what's happening with where your project is in the process. For instance, if you haven't submitted your business plan yet, 2 years is really not enough, since we just said that it'll be 2 years, from the submittal of your business plan. And then just again, thinking about interest rates, we're in a rising interest rate environment. And so interest rates are going up. Last year, our bridge loan product was at 5.5. This year, we're at 6.5 for this quarter. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep that rate for another quarter, but things are changing rapidly. I do believe that the other CDFIs I'm recommending are probably around the same rates, and I think banks, they're probably similar too, but it's good to check with them again if you have that scenario one where you're able to offer a mortgage on your property. And then there's fees for the loan too, right? So this is a real loan that gets underwritten. We have to have a source of funds for it to provide it to you. There is risk to the loan because you might not get your grant proceeds back if something happens with compliance. So we do have, a 1% origination fee on a loan, and then there are closing costs. We try to keep them small, but they are like in-house legal expenses. If there is a mortgage, then there would be title insurance and mortgage recording fees. So again, just stuff to keep in mind when you're building your budgets, so that your funders really know the full extent of the project budget that you're building. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to move into. Okay, I'm going to move into the second part of the presentation, which is about how do you match the RACP grant? So what other things can you pair with RACP if you get a RACP grant? So remember from prior presentations that over 50% of the project must come from matching funds. For some very lucky people, they might be able to use land value as their matching funds, but a lot of other people might need to have real other sources of funds for their project, or just their project is just big. It is what it is. It's not even about the 50% ratio. It's just they have a large project. They have a big construction or renovation project. So two main sources that we'll talk through are obviously equity and grants and other loans. a couple really key things to remember is matching funds cannot be funds that come from the state of Pennsylvania. So this can't be other grant programs with PA. It can't be other loan programs through PA. So just something to keep in mind, because you know there's a lot of other state programs out there. There's multimodal funds, there's local share account, you know, I know there's other things, but you cannot use those as your match. Another thing to keep in mind for the loans that are used as match is the Office of the Budget and RACP guidelines are looking for it to be what's considered permanent financing. And for them, they're defining permanent financing as loans that are at least 20 years in term. This is a very long loan. I would say a typical construction loan for sure is not 20 years. So this is really something you need to start talking to your lenders about right away, or just make sure that whatever your match is, it's not, you know, maybe you have another loan, but you have a different source specifically for the match RACP, and you use a shorter term loan, for instance, like in a different part of the project. I will note that one of the things we'll talk about is new markets tax credits. That is something that would qualify as match. So that, you know, I know a lot of people know that as like a 7-year program. Technically, usually the loan terms are longer than 7 years, and there's like a mechanism to like end it in 7 if you want, but the loan terms actually are longer. And the state is also very they know about new markets and they're comfortable with that being a match source. So we've used that. Many of our projects have used that as match source. I'm going to dive in again to just some examples that we've seen people use for equity on grants. Again, has to be from entities other than the state of Pennsylvania. So some sources that we've seen are city capital dollars, federal appropriations, fundraising and capital campaigns. And then obviously there's philanthropic partners. For instance, William Penn is one of them that we've seen. And then you have grants from maybe the Commerce Department. They have their NED grant program that they release usually once or twice a year that can finance renovation and construction projects for nonprofits. So that's also a great source.
Yes, Sarah, we do have a raised hand and a question in the chat from Drake. So Drake, I can allow you to answer that, ask that live if you would like. You can unmute.
Yeah, can EB5 funds be considered matching funds for RACP?
I'm going to ask Peter if he's seen it before, but I would say that what I know about EB5 is they are typically 5-year loans, and that loan term would mean they would not qualify as permanent financing and then would not qualify as match. So again, they could be in the project, they just can't be the match source. Peter, any other experience with EB5?
No, I was actually going to kick that back to you as you're the EB5 expert at PIDC, but I have not seen it used on a project as match, but certainly with the 5-year term length, it could be used as a RACP bridge source.
Oh, okay, thank you.
That's true. That's a good point. It could be a RACP bridge source. Yeah.
Thank you, Drake.
Yeah. Again, another note to think is that all these sources that I just went through, city capital, federal appropriations, capital campaigns, other grants, those could also be bridged if they needed to. So again, for instance, if you received a commitment from a signed commitment from someone that they will be giving in, you know, December 31st of 2024 is their commitment date. You know, there are lenders that would bridge that for you. So basically they would give you the money now and they would, you know, bridge it until you get, until that commitment comes in. So that's like another thing to think about if you have timing issues. You know, the RACP can be bridged and so can all these other things. And that's definitely something we've worked on with other projects. Okay, we have a question about how does land match work? So I think this was covered in a different session, but we're happy to talk about it again. Peter, do you want to go through land match?
Sure. So land match, you can use up to So if you have a $1 million grant, you can use up to the value of that grant in appraised land value for your property. It's the pre-improvement as is appraised value that can be used to cover your match costs. It is a pretty complicated idea, and it's very project to project with different values of grants, different project sizes. So again, this is something to reach out to me individually with your questions or for your specific project. But when we talked about in previous sessions, you have a $1 RACP grant, a $1 of match for a $2 overall project. The land value acts as your second dollar, your match dollar that Sarah is talking about, the different sources of funds for matching expenses. So that land value can be used to knock out that second dollar of match requirement. But again, you need a very specific appraisal. You don't need to be the landowner. You can lease the land and get permission from the landlord. But that's something, yeah, I'm happy to talk about all the specifics on a one-on-one basis because the questions are kind of unique to each project.
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, if you're able to use land as match, those are great scenarios because you don't have to get any more financing. So this, you don't have to go through this whole thing that we're talking about today. All right. And then the last one is other loans. So again, just to recap, other loans that are match, not just in the project, but are the match source, they do have to be considered permanent financing, so a loan term of at least 20 years. Some potential is bank debt. Now, we definitely see term issues with banks where they struggle to get comfortable with 20 years. So that's why you would want to talk with them like immediately if that is something you need, and if you need them specifically to be the match. That is something that Peter could help you through. Like maybe you don't need them to be the match and they're just in the project in some other fashion. Obviously, CDFIs like PIDC and others, Reinvestment Fund and Nonprofit Finance Fund are often our partners on these where they have, but there's a lot of other CDFIs in the area that are doing different lending for these types of projects. Community First Fund comes to mind. And then you have a couple others in the area. And these have more, we do have flexible rates and terms, so we are able to be a little bit more creative than your typical bank lender. And then I did mention New Markets tax credits. If you do have questions about New Markets, feel free to reach out to me after this. I do lead the deployment for New Markets tax credit as well. Could walk you through that program if you're not familiar with it. But in a budget that does typically attract about 20% of the project in equity. So again, if you have 50% of your projects coming from RACP, about 20% coming from New Markets, that really gets you pretty far of the way to funding your project. So that could be really exciting and a really great use. We have many projects here at PIDC that we worked on that pair RACP and New Markets together. A couple things is that, but New Markets is very competitive. There are not many projects a year, and PIDC does not always get an allocation of tax credits. There are other entities that would also deploy tax credits in Philadelphia, not only PIDC. It does have to be a project in a severely distressed census tract. That is like a definition where we could look up for you exactly what the demographics are of the census tract that you're located in. And it does have to have significant and permanent positive impacts for low-income people. Some examples would be permanent job creation for like underskilled jobs. It would also, another one would be services to the community, such as, healthcare or retail that's specifically targeting the low-income residents of the community. So this is something I'm happy to talk further with you, but for a very high impact project, this would be a good source to think about both RACP and New Market tax credits. We have another question.
I'll jump in for that question, Sarah. So each parcel, so the question is, can adjacent lots be used for my RACP grant? My property consists of 4 parcels with buildings that occupy part of two and then all of the other 2. ideally combining the appraisal. So what you would do is you get a appraisal for either for each of the 4 parcels, or you combine them into one tax lot to get one appraisal. The 4 different lots could typically be done on one appraisal, but again, it's a project by project question.
Great, thanks, Peter. We're actually almost coming to the end, so happy to take some questions about people's projects, or things we've seen or other ways to finance. I do want you to have a chance to note these contacts. So I put myself down here, but I don't want you to think that we're the only people to reach out to. Elizabeth France at Reinvestment Fund is very familiar with RACP bridge loans. She's also participated in other types of financing, such as new markets tax credits. They have loans. They also bridge capital campaigns very often. They're very familiar with that. Elizabeth's been doing this in the Philadelphia market for a long time. So I want you guys to have her contact information. And then we do have a contact at Nonprofit Finance Fund. They're also very active in Philadelphia, especially obviously for mostly nonprofits, but they are branching out a little bit for some other projects. You could contact their director of loan origination. We're also working with them on a RACP bridge loan right now, so they're getting up to speed on that, and they have a lot of other loan programs in the Philadelphia area as well. So great, yes. Yeah.
I had a question about site control, and wanted to find out if a leasehold agreement was sufficient for site control for a RACP project, or if the project has to be owned by the entity that is applying for RACP.
That's a great question. And the answer is leasehold improvements or leasehold work done by the lessee is eligible, but the lease must have a term of 20 years to be eligible for RACP. So it's not, you can't be in year 10 of a 20-year lease. You need to be in year 1 of the 20-year lease. And that works with option years, and again, case-by-case basis. But yeah, it's the rule of 20 years in RACP, where the bonds that fund RACP last for 20 years. So site control needs to be demonstrated for 20 years. That doesn't mean you need to hold on to the project and not be able to sell it or not be able to move on in 20 years, but you need to demonstrate you have that site control for 20 years at the time your grant gets executed.
And I know you didn't ask this. And I know you didn't ask this, but I'm going to add in that we have seen those situations definitely, before, but I just want to add that is a situation where it is difficult to finance a bridge loan, right? Because they don't own the property. And so there's really no collateral to provide for a RACP bridge loan in the event that something happened and the bridge, the loan wasn't being, able to be repaid because of a compliance issue. So just wanted to put that out there that yes, in RACP world, not necessarily an issue to the state, but in terms of the financing that can be provided, that, has definitely been a challenge. And we've had several examples of that in Philly where folks don't own the property.
And I'm going to jump in. Marla Hamilton from PIDC had a few questions, and I'm going to read them off and answer them for the group. Marla asked, how frequently do companies not receive their grant after being notified of award, and what would keep an organization from not receiving the grant after award? So once a grant is awarded, it is yours. It is up to you to follow through the RACP process to receive the funds, but you would need to actively try. You can reject the award after award, and that is fine. But if you entered into the RACP process, you would actively try to not get the award. Would be the only way you wouldn't receive the funds. And things that could affect the success of you receiving your funds is not compliant bidding, not compliant payrolls following the PA prevailing wage, and non-compliant steel. I've worked in RACP for 9 years now, And I've never seen a project who wanted to receive their money not receive their funds. The goal of the folks in Harrisburg, the goal of the compliance consultants, and certainly the goal of PIDC is for you to get your money. And we, sometimes it takes longer or more effort than others, but we always succeed in getting you your funds. So that's a great question, and definitely something that is usually on everyone's minds and one of the first questions that is asked.
Although Peter, is there sometimes an issue where folks just they aren't able to raise the match funds? I know that's so they can't quite ever start.
Totally. So that's a great point, Sarah, and a great topic for today. So yeah, some projects do apply for RACP and they're not ever able to get the project started for whatever reason, or not able to get the required match funding to have a successful RACP grant. So what I do most of the time is to set projects up for success. I talk to projects early on when they're sort of conceptual to make sure that you have the ability to see this through, because it's certainly a long-term process, as we've heard the last few sessions. So setting up your project is the most important part. It's setting it up to know that you've done all the compliance things correct and that you have enough funds and compliant matching funds to successfully go through the RACP compliance process. And then Marla asked another question: what are the chances of getting your project out of the capital budget and awarded the grant? This is sort of what we talked about last week. And another great question, and it's really project by project, and it's all about your effort and your ability to lobby for your project and to advocate for your own project with your representatives, state representatives. And it just takes a lot of effort. I mean, we've talked about it in previous sessions, but I can give you the percentage of projects that get awarded, the ask versus the percentage, but that doesn't capture the effort that the projects who got awarded, what they did versus the projects that weren't awarded. Good projects get awarded this money. A lot of people ask for RACP dollars because they see the big numbers, and putting in an application isn't the hardest thing. So a lot of projects ask, but the real good projects, they get awarded. And I think that's the best advice, and not to get caught up on what percent get awarded or something like that. It's really, if you put the effort in, there's a great chance of you getting these funds.
Can I just add from the perspective of the legislator's office that I'm reiterating what Peter said, is that good projects get awarded. So good business plans, strong boards of directors, a good team working with you, making sure that you are able to articulate effectively what your project is going to do and how effective it's going to be in terms of the economic development aspects, because that is the goal of RACP, to focus on economic development, making sure that you are you have your sources and uses in place, that you have your capital stack in place, that is the funding that you're going to need to be able to bridge your financing and also fund your project and your program in the future. And, making sure that you are in communication and doing your site visits with your elected officials, bringing folks to your ribbon cuttings, if you're having events or activities. It's about cultivating those relationships so that the advocacy can be done for your project when you're not there.
And that's great advice. And that's, that advice is the best from someone who is, helping comb through these applications and helping the awards get made. So that's great. And Savannah has another question, is and it's a great point about land value. So one point I wanted to add is, even if your land value completely covers the match, you will still need source of funds, either your own cash or bridge loan, to cover the RACP amount. So there's always a need for the RACP bridge loan or to cover your RACP amount, even if you are using land value as match. And then there's never a perfect scenario where your project budget magically aligns with your RACP grant amount and your land match amount. So there's always going to be a delta in there for other fees, soft costs, things that aren't reimbursable by RACP, where you still will need cash or other eligible matching funds to do this project. So that is a great point, Savannah. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, and I hope people, take away that from this presentation, that what we want people to be able to budget, appropriately for those expenses. And something that we've seen folks unfortunately do is that they tell, maybe they have a capital campaign and they say, we're trying to raise, $5 million, and then they get to 5 million, and then their funders think, well, you're done, we got there. And then they realize later that there's all these added costs that they weren't expecting. And that can make it really challenging to raise funds, with your funders after that, because they think you got to that point already. So we just want people to be, able to communicate that early. I think we do have another question in the Q&A. So the question is just purchasing a property enough to ensure that you have 20-year control? Yes, that would.
Yeah, so if your name's on the deed, then there's no 20-year requirement. That's all you need.
Okay, there was another question. If land value is greater than the cost of the project, is cash still needed? Yeah, and Peter, if you want to.
Sure. So yeah, so you can use the land value amount up to match your RACP amount. So again, if you have $1 million, say you have a $10 million appraised land value, but you only receive a $1 million RACP grant, you can only use $1 million of that appraised value on your project. What you can do is you write a letter to the Office of the Budget requesting you bank the remaining 9 million for future projects on that site, which is a very helpful tool. But you can only use the amount up to your RACP grant amount as land value as match. So that's what gets very technical when you're starting to balance the sources and uses of funds with land value. So again, please reach out to me individually with those type of project specific questions. But Charlotte, that was a great question.
Yeah, because when you think about it, when we kind of started the presentation, you still need cash as well to, do those other things that Peter mentioned. So for instance, you'll need cash for, your architect, and you'll need cash for the interest expense on the loan, on the bridge loan, so there are these other things that actually do need, other monies. Great. Any other questions? I would say, just another thing, I mean, Peter, especially, but myself as well, in terms of like the overall budget, we're both here to review your project budgets and, give you feedback. I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime about their budgets and help them out with them. So please, feel free to reach out to us, for that advice for your specific project.
Yeah, and I would add, even in non-RACP projects, if you don't think RACP is a good fit for your project, please reach out to Sarah. Sarah manages a wide range of funding sources that can be standalones. They don't all have to work with RACP. So whatever you're thinking for your project, Sarah's a great great source of information. She's seen a lot of projects, a lot of successful projects. So, as she just offered, the feedback she can provide to you is very helpful.
Yep. Looks like we have maybe a couple more questions rolling in. Who determines the awards for RACP grants? Not us, but yes.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I might pass that to the senator's office if they want to jump in.
The Office of the Budget and it's the governor's office. So it's an executive administration decision. The RACP applications go in through the eGrants website on the state's website. And so there's a fee for submitting a RACP application. I think we talked about this in a previous session. It's $500. There's no guarantee that you're going to be successful. So be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. Which is what these sessions are about. But yes, the decision is made by the governor's office. But you also need to build your relationships with your House of Representatives member and your Senate member, just to make sure that they're aware of your project and they can speak about your project when you're not in the room.
And that's a great advice. What I always tell projects at the early stages is, get your project out there, where if a call is made in Harrisburg or in the city and someone asks, do you know about ABC's project? And the answer is no, that's not a good sign. So you want, folks to know about your project. And as it's been said before, interaction with the state reps, tours of your site, tours of your organization are all highly recommended. And there's another great question about what is the due diligence the state does in awarding RACP, example, financials. Their decision is based on a few things. One, it's your application. The application doesn't ask for a whole lot of information, but it's very clear, what project is for real, what project's able to move forward through the RACP application. You can really see, who's for real and who's not for real. And the second part of it is those relationships with with Harrisburg, with your House of Representatives, state senators, governor's office, City of Philadelphia Commerce Department, where it is asked around, do you know this project? And you want your project to be known, and there is no technical financial review. Once you are awarded the funds, the grant agreement won't be written for your project until you can demonstrate you have enough money to complete the project. So on the back end of the process, yes, there is some financial due diligence, but at the application and award stage, there's no formal due diligence done.
And this is a good time maybe for me to point out that for other lending, and the other programs I mentioned today, there would be a lot of financial due diligence. So, for instance, PIDC has a extensive online application where we ask for previous, tax returns or financial statements. We're asking about if it's a for-profit, we're asking for personal owners, credit information and personal financial statements and their assets and their liabilities. So there would be very extensive if you ended up needing other types of financing from PIDC or another lender.
Can I also add that I think that one of the due diligence parts is, do you know what you're talking about? So the average cost per square foot to build a house in Pennsylvania is between $100 and $280 a square foot. If you submit a project that says your square footage is $1,000 a square foot, that's going to cause a red flag. So I think that part of the due diligence is making sure that you also understand the forms, the budget forms, because those budget forms are informed by your value engineering, by your construction documents, by your due diligence and knowing the cost of your construction and the cost of your supplies and the how much your soft costs are too. So the forms that are provided by the applications stay with you. Those forms stay with you as you are submitting your reimbursement requests to PIDC. They stay with you. They can be amended, but they are forms that you need to familiarize yourself with because they are the forms that are used by PIDC to be able to justify your reimbursements. So that's the due diligence, making sure that what you say you're going to do in your narrative matches what you are requesting the funds for in your budget.
All right. I think that's it for the questions, and yeah, just appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit with you, and feel free to reach out to us. Jasmine, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that information. Thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. I hope that you got all of them answered today. As mentioned, you can always follow up with Sarah. You do have her contact information. I placed that earlier on in the chat. If you still need to record that, please follow up with her if you have any further questions. She's the go-to source, so she's going to be the best person. I also want to thank all of our co-sponsors as well. And I want to remind everyone, this is only the third session. If you happen to have missed the first and second session, please go back. We do have a recording of those sessions on our resources page, which I placed in the chat for you. So please go ahead and click that. You can go back and recap over some of that information, take some notes. And this session today is also recorded. We'll be placing it on our resource page early next week. We'll follow it with an email to this information with you as well. If you have not yet registered to attend our last session, what are you waiting for? So make sure that you register for that as well. That's going to be coming up for our number 4 session on February 16th. So that's next week. It's from 1 to 2 o'clock. We're going to be discussing winning a RACP grant and getting through construction. So I'm going to place the registration link for that one in our chat as well. Please be sure that you register if you have not already. If you have registered, I want to make sure that you are attending, so don't miss it, so you can answer your questions live. That is the perk to being able to attend live. But before I go, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our co-sponsors, our wonderful co-sponsors who were able to work with us to get this information out to you today. And I want to thank, of course, the wonderful Senator Sharif Street's office, 3rd Senatorial District, for being our co-sponsor. I want to thank PACDC, as well as our Independence Business Alliance, the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Asian American Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, and the African American Chamber of Commerce for PA, New Jersey, and Delaware. Thank you so much for all of the help. For those who would like to attend further sessions with PIDC, please go to our website. We're at pidcphila.com/events, because we, of course, have many sessions outside of just RACP that we're discussing to help you grow your business. But without further ado, I do want to give the Senator's office any parting words before we leave for today's session.
So I do again want to thank all the partners in PIDC. There's been robust participation in the sessions, which I'm very glad to see that folks are educating themselves about this program and process. It is a long-term commitment, and it is one that is really rewarding, and you have to continue to do. I would familiarize yourself with the RACP website and take a look at what the requirements are. Oftentimes what happens is people start their projects and then they're not RACP compliant. And so we want to make sure that we're getting people through all the stages of being successful. And I want to thank again PIDC and Marla and Peter and Jasmine and Sarah and Lawrence for putting on such great sessions. It's really important that the information get out there and to demystify this program.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Sarah, Peter, Marla. I appreciate everyone. Enjoy your day. We'll see you next week for our 4th session and last session. Take care.